You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live.
Hello and welcome to Garibaldi Red, Nottingham Forest podcast, Nottinghamshire Live. My name is Matt Davis and I'm joined today by a returning guest in former Reds midfielder and Sky Sports presenter David Prutton. Good afternoon, Prut. How are you?
I'm very well, Matt. How are you? I'm enjoying that music. Is that a new addition? It gets you pumped, doesn't it? That I like it.
It gets stuck in your head if you present this for a year. You can't really escape it.
You're just walking around the house going, dan. No, it's good. It's good. I like it. It's like when we do our bits and pieces on the telly when we're doing the games, and there's obviously huge departments that when you're watching it and all these shots are coming in, the music goes over it and the graphics, that spend a lot of time doing that. And I'm always on them to get the rock music in. But especially Saturday lunchtime, you want to come flying in there. You're like, yeah, let's go. And they always kind of turn me down. But I think it's the vital part of getting you in the mood, and that has got me in the mood. So well done.
Good. We shall talk some Nottingham Forest imminently. I should give everyone a warning. If you hear me beeping every 20 minutes and something inflating, that is my blood pressure monitor that I have to wear for the next 24 hours, which I was talking to Prutz about before, is an absolute bloody nightmare. You would think, I'm not criticising the NHS, God love the NHS, but you would think it'd be some magnificent technology, but it's actually a massive rig that goes around my arm. I'm not demonstrating that very well. And then round my back.
You've just shown us your elbow more than anything else.
I know. Hang on. No one wants to see this. Let's talk about football. No one wants to see or hear this. Let's talk about Nottingham Forest.
We all wish you well. That's the main thing. There you go.
I hope so. Forest, then, as we're here actually to talk about, you've seen them recently a few times against Derby, against Watford. What have you made of them?
It's a funny stage of the season that we're talking about this, because I think across the board we're seeing the results of teams having a hell of a lot of games, having a very short break, and in search of some form of continuity with how the season's gone so far. I think undoubtedly what's happened with Chris, he's steadied the ship. He's done a lot of the very good things that needed to be done, i.e. make them more solid defensively and harder to beat. It's just, if you look at the Derby against Derby, if you look at the game against Watford, it's a well kind of travelled opinion on Forest. Lots of effort, lots of endeavour this season. The quality, though, in the final third is missing, and I think that's something that I presume would frustrate all Forest fans. But on the flip side of it is, if we're erring on the side of positivity, given how they started the season, given how at times it looked quite dangerous, the situation that they're in, and quite obviously not completely and utterly 100% safe as yet, I think the steady increments that Chris has made defensively maybe just masks their lack of poke going forward.
Thanks to everyone who's commented on my blood pressure. No, watching Forest does not do anything good for your blood pressure, Richard Leonard or Greg Oram. And also, we'll break on another tangent. Lee Tilson, we were talking about your Serie A work before we started this. Lee Tilson is a fan of your Serie A commentary.
So he knows where you get it, which we'll have to ask him where on earth he get it. I think I'm trying to work out. It'll be on some obscure channel, but that's very nice. It's a delight to do. And again, it's funny because I've got the privilege, obviously, the completely ridiculous privilege of being able to talk about different football matches and different levels. And there's a lot of similarities. Before people jump in and say, so a lot of similarities between Forest and perhaps a Serie A team that I might have done recently. But in the sense of lots of games, players that are being asked to go through very, very quick successions of matches and runs of matches, and there's the levels do dip and they do soar across most of the football that we're seeing. So I think, like, without wanting to knit together this whole chat before we've even had it, there's a lot to be positive about Forest. But for the majority of the teams, I think it's getting towards the end of this season and having a chance to take a step back, have a breath, and just work out where on earth we're going next.
There's a question from Richard Ottaway, which kind of leans into what we were talking about the lack of cutting edge. He talks about a lack of pace, which we've spoken about before on this podcast, and also where they're taking shots from. And I'd add to that where they're crossing the ball from. Have you noticed that they're not really creating too many glaring opportunities, are they?
No, there's in the second half in the Watford game, a couple of decent balls are put in by Anthony. Didn't really not in the position where I think one of the possibly one of the better chances or the most forward thinking of chances was a cross into the box for Gaetan Bong to try and get his head on, which you're kind of thinking, if that's what, with the greatest respect, if that's what Forest are relying on to get themselves in games, and they're going to struggle with that. I think Glenn offers them something different. Lyle has got goals in him, but hasn't necessarily hit the ground running with that. Obviously, we know Lewis can score goals at this level as well. Look, Freeman's even he reading his comments during the course of the week about Forest fans haven't seen the best of him, which I think is nice and honest from a player that wants to come and impress. And Sammy Amiobi is another player. It sounds like he may be moving on to pastures new when the season finishes, but it's tough because in theory, like we said, a fit Lewis Grabban gets you 15 goals a season, doesn't he? But there's got to be players on that peripheral level that are going to contribute, and it's a tough one because if it's a personnel thing, then quite obviously they've got to wait. They've got to wait till the summer, and then from there cut the cloth accordingly. Whether there's money to be had to be used to bring that type of wicked pace in. Alex Martin is a player that's got pace, but you know what I mean. It's about the development of these players and getting these players into the side at the right time. I'll tell you one that does intrigue me. The potential of what he may have next season is Brennan Johnson and what he would bring to the forward line, because he's done obviously very well on loan at Lincoln. It's a big step up coming back to Forest and being able to play for a club of that stature. But there's a bright light to perhaps look toward. That's not me placing Forest's sole attacking potential on the shoulders of one very young man, but it's strange, and I do sympathise with Forest fans because I'm guessing there's a fair bit of head scratching going on with how this season has got to where it is and how it's going to end.
Yeah, there's certainly a growing consensus about the strikers and the need to sign at least one striker, probably two. There's a few people saying that already. Well, what do you think about that? Because Murray's 37, but we know Houghton loves him. Taylor's only signed last summer and he's 30. I think actually might be 31 very soon. And then Grabban's 33. And there's a case to be made that he's on the wane, but then there's also a case to be made that he's got proven pedigree and might bounce back and score 20 goals next season. Do you think it's a dilemma for Houghton to whether he sticks or twists?
No, I do. I think the fact, and having been a player of a certain age that is perceived in a certain way, then I think once you do get into the 30s bracket, not just turn 30, but as you say, 33 and with Glenn. But I mean, it's no surprise at all with what Glenn's bringing. Glenn's never been. There's a lot of very, very good things Glenn Murray is, but out and out pace has never really been one of those. So whether it's a case of playing him with another to facilitate that, but two up front seems to be something that, particularly at Forest in recent seasons, and maybe there's a broader chat about football, what's fashionable in football and what's the vogue kind of formation. But sometimes sticking two centre forwards up without making it sound too much like it's straightforward gives you a better chance of getting goals, doesn't it? Especially when you can have decent delivery with whether it's Knockout whipping balls in or Joe Lolly whipping balls in. Then that's a potential option. But no, I do think there is something for Chris to ponder it in the summer. But if you're going to get a player in that's going to, you can't guarantee goals, can you? If you're going to get a player in that you want to get at least 15, pushing 20 and hopefully more, then it's going to cost money. It's a big challenge. I watched a player last night in the Sunderland Pompey game, Charlie Wyke. 26 goals he's got in all competitions this season, 21 in that particular division. Yes, it's a step up. Yes, it's a different football club. Obviously, Sunderland with greater experience of the Premier League in more recent years than Forest have had. But I guess there'd be a premium on a player like that. Whether he'd want to move would be a different thing. And this is obviously me just hypothetically talking about a player that's quite obviously under contract with another team. But there are players out there. It's just whether these players like a Lyle, who was very vocal about wanting to come out of Charlton, wanted to make sure that the next contract, the next club was big enough and befitted what he thought he could do. He's still got to prove himself. And just because someone doesn't hit the ground running immediately doesn't mean to say that that's them done at Forest. Just means that there's a bigger onus on him next year to score goals.
There's a few people saying, like Jeff Cott at Plymouth and Piggott at Wimbledon. That's a gamble as well, though, isn't it? I mean, they're quite young. Chris Hughton's going to be under pressure at the start of next season because he's Nottingham Forest manager. That's inevitable. It's not an easy thing to do to build a squad, is it? When you've got to take a punt on someone somewhere, I suppose.
It's not. And given just before we came on, we were chatting about, and we'll come on to it, about the Championship next season and the disparity perhaps in clubs, the haves and the have-nots. The broader financial landscape of what Forest have got to deal with, obviously within the Championship, is something that's got to come into it as well. Obviously, at one stage we were all looking forward to the redevelopment of the ground, weren't we, and how wonderful that looked. And I don't quite know where that is in a sense of what financial commitments come above that, below that, how that pans out. But I think Forest fans would prefer a bright, shiny new team rather than somewhere which in due course would possibly happen if success came after that, would be something that they'd address with regards to the ground. But and going back to the point they made about the players that we're talking about, anybody who comes in, regardless of level that they've been at, potential that they've shown or proven to have, a transfer, a signing is always a portion of it's going to be a gamble. So it's just really intriguing. I mean, it's one that I think when you are looking when you're from the outside looking in, you're intrigued to see what the next port of call is. But it's a hell of a job that Chris has got in his hands. But it's a different, and it'll be a different remit going into next season. It absolutely has to be, because of the teams that we see potentially going up and the teams that we see in the middle ground of the Championship.
True. I was just inflating then, if anyone could
hear
that.
You were beeping, weren't you? That wasn't me reversing
beeping
on one of my opinions. going right back over something that we said.
You said about people doubting you when you reach an age as a player. What was your attitude to that when you were playing? Did it drag you down or not? Or did it fire you up?
Well, that happened with, about 17 with me. So I had to spend 15 years making sure that you pushed it to the. Well, you just get to the point where there's a perception of a player of a certain age that it comes to us all, regardless of what time of your career it is, where you're deemed to be past it, or legs have gone, or or players aren't as robust as they once were. And I always kind of thought it was up to you to prove them wrong, because it happens all the way through your career. There's always opinions, and that's what makes it such a wonderful thing to discuss. And that's what, when you listen to Forest fans and the way that they talk and their perception of their team, or the different perceptions of the players in it, that's what makes it fascinating. And those doubts that you get at 30 plus, I know they're different in perhaps what the subject of them is, but there's no difference to what you have as a footballer, whether you turn pro at 16 and people have got doubts about whether you'll actually become a professional or play in the first team or get a run of games in the first team or do it at a different level. There's a constant sequence of events where you've got to prove yourself, and the narrative in your head as well. Are you good enough to do this? Am I good enough to play in this team? Am I good enough to keep going? Have I got the desire, the ability, the ambition to keep pushing yourself further and further on? And to get someone like Glenn at 37, I mean, what he's done in his career has been absolutely phenomenal. Whether Forest see the absolute best version of Glenn Murray at 37, I don't know. But they'll get a hell of a member of a squad and a team that I think would only benefit the players around him.
The other thing I was going to ask you from your personal experience is you'll have played in teams that can't hit the back of the net for love nor money. How do you get out of that? How do you break that rut?
Well, I mean, given my very minimal goal scoring attributes, you just relied a hell of a lot on the lads that were there to do that. I think, and sometimes it just works. If you take that Forest side that got to the playoffs, I left in the January of 2003, but you had David Johnson and Marlon Harewood, both at least 20 goals. I don't know whether they both got to 25, but they were two players that had different attributes completely. They had the bit in common, which was the turn of pace, and I like to think that particular side played in quite an expansive way that created a lot of chances, which makes it again sound so very straightforward, but it was quite an open attacking side with energy and legs, and a lot of fearlessness that comes with having a lot of young players that care deeply about the job and the fans, but not fearful of doing things wrong. So when you think about teams, I mean, apologies for using a reference from almost 20 years ago, but that's when you are in teams where that's been a bit of a problem. It's back to basics. It's playing to the striker's strengths, whether that's getting the ball into the box a lot quicker than usual, whether that's making sure that because it was fascinating because I was sat with Gary Monk doing a game a few weeks back and done a few with him and know Gary from a long time back, and he was talking about the way he lines his teams up with two up front, with games in the Championship being won by the odd goal, and more often than not coming from set pieces and mistakes. And subsequently, the next 4 games I watched were all mistake-laden games where you think, oh, he's back to what he said. So if games are that tight, then you look at a Forest side with players that can deliver a decent ball into the box. And then it's not only the onus on the strikers to score goals, it's about sprinting it around because, again, we looked at stats in the run-up to games as people that possibly tuning might see. And Forest top scorer Lyle Taylor comes on, 4 goals to his name, joint top scorer with Mr. OG, as in goals that had gone in against Forest from other players, which is for a team and a club, maybe not a team, but a club that should be in the upper reaches, at least of that division. It's not good enough, is it?
No, it's not. Don't worry about it.
Just going to double check your blood pressure there, whether you just got.
Well, I will do in about 18 minutes. Don't worry about referencing that Paul Hart team. I do it all the time. It was the team I grew up watching. Is it bad that I grew up? Well, I didn't grow up. We're the same age. But I used to watch.
For a minute there, that made me sound very, very old.
Very old. But no, I used to watch that team all the time. My favourite Forest team.
It was. It's funny because I was in Harrogate yesterday, or the day before, having a little bit of physio done. Again, as you kind of have a bit of maintenance, and it's Gary Fleming who was our physio at the time. He's got practice now up in York and Harrogate, and does a bit in Nottingham as well. And we were chatting about the very same thing, which might, if people are listening and watching this, going, "Christ, lads, any chance of you moving on from that period of time a long time ago?" But that's your most relevant touchstone. We were chatting about the players that were in it and how it was, and even in the staff as well, the dynamics of who was there, Paul with Chaz, and the fact they had Liam with him and Bomber and Flem himself wasn't that far removed from coming out of the game and being a younger physio. It was a great energy, a great dynamic to it all, and it was fantastic because again we were, I can't remember which game we were doing the other week, and it was Bournemouth Forest. So we had Simon Francis in, who's of course is from Nottingham, and Viv Anderson. Anyone who's met Viv will know that he's just a glorious human being, a lovely fella, and we sat chatting and. Sometimes, and apologies if I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but you obviously were looking at shots of the game and of the City Ground and the Trent End, and the cameras panning around. Oh, no one's there, which is just an absolute travesty. But it comes up where there's a picture of Brian Clough that comes in the montage before the players come out on the big screen, and it just gives you a chance to ask Viv Anderson, European Cup winner Viv Anderson, what it was like and how it was. And yes, it's football from yesteryear. Yes, it feels like a different era, but to sit with people that have played for that particular club and actually done things with that, I mean, proper things with that particular football club, Stuart Pearce as well, it's just immense. And it just reminds you when we are in these fallow periods, and as a Forest fan, dealing with the thick and the thin of what it takes to follow this particular football club, then that's what keeps people coming back. And hopefully it brings them back in droves once you can come in and sound out your both your praise and your frustration in person and in full voice, doesn't it? Which we hope, again, like I said, a tangent, but we hope it's very soon.
Bringing it back to the present day, then it's
to something relevant, yeah.
To something relevant. Ham-fistedly, my link is going to be: do you see? It's Reading on Saturday. Do you see any similarities in that Reading team with the team that you came through in? Because they've got a Lucas Shaw who's scoring a lot of goals, having not done a lot for a number of years, which is sort of a David Johnson comparison. And then they've got some young players coming through, and they play quite vibrant football. They've come from not nowhere, but they weren't overly fancied. Do you see any similarities with that Reading team? And then obviously your thoughts on the game, and if you think Forest can actually nick a point or a win?
Well, they can, because they are prone to slipping up, Reading, but they've been consistently very good, you've got to say, over the course of the season. I think you're absolutely right to reference those types of players. Joao was having a fantastic year. I think something that Wednesday fans would say they saw in fits and starts. There was that consistent level. And maybe when he was at Wednesday, I mean, going up against the likes of Hooper, Fletcher, Ati, Nuhiu, I mean, there were plenty of there was plenty of centre forwards there. Jordan Rhodes, another one, plenty of centre forwards there that were battling out for that particular position. But he seems to have found himself front and centre at Reading, which has really, really helped him. Michael Olise is a fantastic player. Omar Richards, of course, a man that's going to be moving on to one of the biggest clubs in European football, if not world football, at the end of the season when he goes to Munich. So there are similarities. And I think with Reading, even though we are talking about a side with Premier League experience, you've got to say that going into this season, that level of expectation perhaps wasn't there with a team such as that. So that obviously helps. That obviously helps when you are looking at a team going into a season without that much expectation. And maybe, like you said, with the similarities of that Forest side, which had come off the back of not too, because it was 99, wasn't it, when they came out of the Premier League, and then we had the real turnaround with different managers, obviously. Dave Bassett being there, Ron Atkinson and David Platt coming in, then Paul taking over from David. And then that upswing of getting young players into the side, whether that was by demand or by necessity, you don't know. Because I'm not too au fait with that particular time about how that comes about. You're just happy to be playing and part of something like that. So there are similarities. And again, maybe with the similarities with that squad of, yes, we've got a good team. Yes, we've got a good squad. Do we presume to be promotion contenders? Quietly, possibly, yes. But from the outside looking in, you go, well, maybe give them a few years to meld together. But there was an almost instantaneous hit with all that coming together. And Reading found themselves in a cracking position. And Forest have definitely got to be worried because they have got players that can really do them some damage, as was shown, obviously, putting Wednesday to the sword at the weekend. So it's going to be tough, but it begins a run of games, doesn't it, Matt? As we were chatting before we came on here, that Forest are going to. Will they know more about themselves after playing teams that are going for promotion? I don't know, but I think it'll give them a decent yardstick of hopefully where they should be come next season.
Yeah, I mean, it's Reading, Norwich, Brentford and Cardiff are the next four games. So Forest are on 40 points, at 8 points above the relegation zone. Still not quite safe. Would you still be worried about them going down, or are there three worst teams?
Well, I think, given what we've seen from Wycombe, Wednesday are on a really, really poor run, aren't they? It's a hell of a job that Darren Moore stepped into there. And I think between Coventry, Birmingham and Rotherham, I'll chuck Derby in there just to keep Forest fans happy as well, possibly Huddersfield as well. There's certainly teams below them. I certainly think there's three worse teams there than them, particularly in the Championship. Of course I do. And it's given where they are, as you say, it's close enough to feel that little bit of discomfort, but there's a nice enough gap to think that the rest of the season should be about looking upwards rather than looking over the shoulders, because yes, there's a tough run of games coming. But as you've seen, the inconsistencies that have been shown down the bottom, Birmingham, 1 minute looking like they're getting dragged in, the next minute stringing a couple of results together. Rotherham, you've got to look at the games in hand that they've got because they are stacking up now, aren't they? So that's something else that Forest have to be wary of. And as for someone like a Coventry, if they grit their teeth and stay above the dotted line, then that's been a hell of a season for them. But going back to Forest, it's got to be about consolidation as quick as possible. And it's just a diverse range of emotions from what we saw at the end of last season, isn't it? As opposed to what we're seeing with this.
Who would be your three to go down?
I think Wycombe. As much as I love what Gareth has done with that particular football club, getting him into the top tier is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So the top tier, the second tier, the highest tier that they've got into. I mean, Christ, can you imagine if they got him in the Premier League? That would be literally phenomenal. So it looks like an instant return for them. Rotherham, not too sure about, given the Jekyll and Hyde nature of them, but those games in hand might just see him through. Wednesday, again, pains me to say, but it looks like a monumental achievement that they're going to have to create to get out of this. And maybe they're setting up with Darren in charge of a League One side next season ultimately bounce back. And then after that, I can't overly see. I mentioned Derby, but whether they get sucked into it, I don't know. Then I think it's another of Coventry, Birmingham, and Rotherham, which is it's tough, really tough. Mightily big clubs that are down there. Which, when you look at what they've all had to put up with from a fan base point of view, they don't really deserve to go through that again, do they?
No. I would go. Not that people care what I think.
I do. It's debate.
All right. Well, I'll go Wickham Wednesday, even though they're one of your old clubs. They look really doomed. And then I think Birmingham would be the third one. But because I work across the Midlands for our company, I don't think Coventry are very confident that they'll stay up, and they seem to have enough about them. I wouldn't bank on Derby not going down to the wire. The last 2 games, they've been very poor, and they lumped all their eggs in a lot of kids coming in January, and Lee Gregory wouldn't bank on getting a load of goals. So I wouldn't be surprised if Derby were very nervous. I don't think Forest will be worried after these 4 games. Touch wood, their running's fairly favourable. So I would go, Wickham Wednesday and Birmingham to go down.
Yeah, I can see all those. Are you looking at Rotherham with all those games in hand? But it's funny, isn't it? Because again, chatting to the lads that the guests that we have the pleasure of chatting to, you can almost subconsciously be drawn to games in hand as that's all right. Then we've got 4 games in hand. Boom, 12 points there. You think, well, it's not quite as straightforward as that is, and it's funny. It's where the Rotherham find themselves in that position where they're going to be a yo-yo club between League One and the Championship, and whether someone like Birmingham gets sucked into it. Because, as I said, when they're good, they're decent, but when they're not, it's a tough watch, I think, when it comes to Birmingham, isn't it? And it's just a shame that there's a lot of Midlands-based football clubs there that you get to cover, Matt. We're all fighting at the wrong end of the division.
True. I think Rotherham. It might be a case of Birmingham being worse than Rotherham. Birmingham being that bad that they'd barely get another point, and Rotherham scraping off, or that kind of scenario, maybe.
Yeah, again, I can see all of that, but I also think, as you say, when you talk about Derby going to the wire, given what we saw with Forest and Swansea at the end of the last season, I don't think. There's not many things that are beyond comprehension when it comes to thinking how that table could possibly look come the end of the season, is there?
Just before we switch gears and talk about Forest into the summer, who are the 3 who are going up, do you think?
Norwich, I think, are pretty boxed off, 10 points clear. It's funny as well, isn't it, when you hear managers, I think it was Thomas Frank the other week, and there's another one in recent week, maybe Cisco at Watford, who were even they're kind of talk, whether it's a reverse psychology thing, but they're all talking like Norwich are home and hosed, aren't they? Which I think, given what we've seen, given how good Buendia's been, Pukki's been, I mean, I could go through the list of players that they've got that have been fantastic. Then if they end up top of the tree, then there won't be many people, whether you're a neutral fan or a fan of someone else, that would say they don't deserve it. And then that fight for second space, I think, is very, very intriguing when you look at Watford, who have got it at the moment, but Swansea with games in hand, and Brentford with games in hand, even though we saw Swansea in action last night. But given the rub of the green that they had in the previous 2 games with those late penalties, you get the feeling something might just be happening with Swansea that gets them into second spot. And then after that, Brentford, we saw climb to the top of the tree, have a little wobble, whether that was to do with the pressure, whether that was to do with the injury list that they've got to contend with. Both of those things have got to come into it. I think Barnes is an intriguing one. If Barnsley are there at the end of the season after crashing into the playoffs on, I think, was it 7 wins on the spin? Ludicrous run of form, which sees them as contenders after hanging on by the skin of the teeth in the last season. So let me think. Norwich, yes. Swansea, potential for second. Then after that, toss it between Watford and Brentford, I'd say.
I would go Norwich first, Brentford second, and either Barnsley or Cardiff to brutalise their way through the playoffs and just batter teams into submission, and then be awful in the Premier League. But watching them play. I don't know if you see it on Twitter, are you? But there's a clip of Birmingham and Barnsley. It's 50 seconds long of just absolutely horrific football, and I think that might be how Barnsley do it. I don't know.
Don't worry. I've been part of many horrific football matches, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But I think when you look at Barnsley and what they've managed to do when managers have moved on and they've changed whoever's at the top, they're a high energy side that like to press. I mean, pressing is quite obviously very, very fashionable in football. And they've got players like Daryl DK and Alex Mowat that really do operate very well at this level. So they've got that chance of being in the playoffs with a lack of expectation, which might just serve them well. And given what we've seen from Cardiff since Mick's gone in, he's not really done too much more than we thought Mick could do, to be honest. I say he might attract... Oh, he might have. Can you attract detractors? He might have detractors in certain brackets and a certain snobbishness that comes with viewing football. But he knows how to make that side particularly so far effective. And I think you're absolutely right. It'd be an intriguing proposition to see them perhaps upsetting the status quo. When we looked a few weeks back or a couple of months back and thought Bournemouth would walk it with the squad that they've got, Watford would walk it with the squad that they've got, and those two teams in particular not having done that, but still in the mix.
We'll get back to Forest then. You talk about a manager who knows what they're doing. I assume you're going to tell me Chris Hughton should stay for Forest next season because he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, as well, with perception you look at, and again, it's not trying to come instantly off Forest as soon as we start talking about it. So you look at the position that Brighton find themselves in with Graham Potter out of the bottom three in the Premier League on goal difference, but a perception that the football's better. But yes, highest ever league finish for them last season. But they were looking for an evolution of what Chris brought. So again, perception sometimes wins out in football. But I think the remit from Chris coming in was to get Forest away from trouble as soon as possible, and he's steadily managed to incrementally get them better. Has it been the upswing that's seen them fly into the top half, a la Cardiff or Barnsley or teams such as that? No, it's not. But there's certainly, as I said, there's a certain solidity that's been brought to a defence and a team that looked fragile, that I felt, and almost looked a bit callow. So, yes, it's been better. And yes, he knows how to get a team out of this division, which you'd think Forest fans are hanging the hat on. But he is a manager of a certain ilk, whether you want dynamism, whether you want histrionics and animation on the sideline. It is a different debate altogether, but he can only work with the team that he's got, and the team that he's got over the course of a season, given where it is, hasn't performed as it should do, hasn't been as consistent as it should be. Therefore, whether that's a personnel thing that he addresses in the summer or just a change in the approach, because time's slipping by, it's ebbing away, isn't it? When you look at Forest in the second tier, it's been way too long.
What about in the summer in terms of building a squad then? Obviously, we don't know what the budget's going to be, and they've got a few out-of-contract players, 4 or 5 on loan. You don't want to see another big clear out after what happened last summer, but do you think there might be one coming or not?
Well, I mean, given what the pandemic has chucked up as well, whether it's going to be easy to get players out that don't want to go anywhere because they realise that they're onto a good thing at Forest, and then being able to move players from other sides with whatever finances they've got at their disposal. I think if you're looking for a team that's greater than the sum of its parts, I mean, if you look at the starting 11 from the Watford game with Samba, Worrell, Figueiredo, Christie, Bond, Kravinovic, Freeman, Knockaert, James Garner, that there's a lot of talk about him, and the next step of his journey as a younger footballer is to be as consistent as all the hype is. And I think, again, we've seen bits of that since he's been at Forest. I think Forest fans, again, would want to see more. Ryan Yates, there's differing opinions on Ryan Yates. I don't think you can doubt his approach to his game or his devotion to the way he plays football. Whether he's getting judged on the fact that he's not scoring the goals or amount of goals that a midfielder in theory should do for a team such as Forest to get them up the division is a different debate, because goal scoring midfielders can be like a certain Rocking or something. And if you do get players like that, then they don't hang around in the Championship for very long, do they? And Glenn Murray, we know, can score goals, but whether he's been used or serviced in the right way, maybe something that needs to be addressed between now and the end of the season. That, to me, when you look at it as a squad, as a starting 11, when you've obviously got the likes of Joe and Sammy on the bench, Lyle Taylor also on the bench, with more to come from everyone that I've spoken about there. The team that gets out of the Championship, as we've spoken about with Norwich, who have been fantastic, kept a lot of players from when they've come down. Swansea, if you look at how they've gone about it. Watford, lots of Premier League experience in there. Bournemouth, of course, with their recent Premier League history. They're the teams that you're looking at that you think, well, yep, they really should be up there. The rest, there's a whole tranche of teams there that are as good as each other. I think Forest firmly fit into that bracket. And again, consistency, confidence that comes off the back of not having a terrible start, off the back of an awful finish the last season, that hangover that gets shifted and moved away, is something that should stand them in good stead. Any team, I've spoken about this a lot because of geographically where I am and the fact that I've had the, again, ridiculous privilege of playing for some very, very big clubs, possibly when they were at their very best, which I think would be the general consensus. When you look at, say, like a Leeds United and what they would need, what they were looking at in January of last season to get them through and out into the Premier League, the team that's gone up there and done well to try and establish themselves does contain the likes of Liam Cooper, Luke Ayling, Patrick Bamford scoring goals in the Premier League now, Calvin Phillips, who's come on and developed into a very, very good Premier League midfielder. There's a lot of similarities with players that have come through, like Forest players that have come through. And some of it's timing, some of it's undoubtedly coaching, obviously, with what Bielsa's done with them. But he's taken Leeds into the Premier League for the first time in 16 years. First time he's done it in his career. With Chris, he's got history of this division. He's got experience of the division above. So I think, without it sounding too airy-fairy and clutching things out of the air, why not that Forest squad? You're probably asking me as a so-called pundit or former footballer with some form of insight and opinion on it. But you get that team playing well, knowing what it can do. You get someone who helps Joe get to back to what he was, with Matty Cash bombing up and down next to him. There's a squad in there that can challenge, undoubtedly. And you add to that with a bit of youthful exuberance, a bit of pace that comes that can change a game, and being able to be as solid as possible at the back. Then it's a team that should have top six aspirations and a squad that should have that, given what we've seen from them last season and in fits and starts this season.
There's a clutch of players who've underperformed, who Forest are still saddled with. I'll bring up Richard Ottaway's list here. Some of these are a bit harsh, maybe. I think Blackett's been injured a lot, but I'd certainly put Arter and Colback at the head of that list. What do you do with them? Yeah. What do you do with them, though? Do you go on big money? Can you ship them out, or do you try and get the best out of them next season?
Depends what the pressure is from the people who run the finances. If they are players of a certain age on a certain level of income, you do well to get them out. That's not me casting aspersions on their approach. I think historically, what the likes of Colback and Arter bring to a midfield is predominantly a bite to it. Predominantly, because that's the thing. We've seen Harry Arter playing. We saw him play away at Bournemouth in a 10 position, didn't we? Which I don't think suits him. We've also seen him play.
It wasn't his fault, really.
No, but that's the thing. It's like, I mean, this is me not putting me in a bracket with journeyman David Prutton that's not played football for God knows how long. It's like putting me at number 10 or on the wing. You kind of scratch it. I mean, I made central midfield look hard enough, but when you go in, can you go up against a fullback? Well, no, because I'm not quick. I don't have a trick, and my crossing's not very good. You only put me out here to run around. So let me run around closer to players where you might see a bit more of the action. So when it comes to using the players correctly, that's quite obviously Chris's responsibility completely. But I think if you have got players such as that, and with Colback as well, Blackett, I think you're absolutely right. Injuries have hampered that, and Lyle Taylor was on the comment as well. Which again, absolutely, if a player comes in and classes himself as a striker and doesn't get the goals, then the fingers pointed straight directly at that player. sorry, you need to score more goals. And whether that's a debate for him to have with the rest of his teammates saying, you need to help me out with this, is inwardly what you've got to work out on the training pitch and in the dressing room, and then eventually you take it into the games. But again, without me trying to sound relentlessly like, let's look at the positives with this, I'd like to think that the professionalism of an Arter, the experience of a Harry Arter, of a Colback, means that between now and the end of the season, they show Forest fans what they can do. And at the start of and going into next season, there's a collective sense of sitting around going, lads, there's a hell of a lot of experience in this dressing room. We should be doing and wanting better for ourselves. And like I said, I'd like to think that there is. I don't think in that Forest, and it doesn't strike me as that, and not having any real inside knowledge with regards to the attitude and the aptitude of the players. I'd be intrigued to know what Forest fans thought. Does anyone strike you as a bad egg in and amongst that? There's a difference between a player not being good enough and a player that doesn't look like he's willing and ready to put a shift in, which again is a bit of an old-fashioned cliche, but that's ticking the first box of page one of being a footballer, doing that particular type of thing.
Yeah, I don't think there is. Although it does lead me on to my next question about the loan players. I was going to ask about Knockaert because he's very chalk and cheese. He's been very good since he came back, I thought. And second half against Derby, he was very good. I said this on a stream I did the other day. I didn't like his body language at all in the first half at Watford. He didn't seem tuned into the game or whatever it was.
It was awful. Well, the goal comes from
him not tracking.
Yeah, which you look at it, and we were chatting about it at half time, and you analyse it, and part of you, in anything that you do when we talk about that, whether sometimes when things are glaringly obvious, you touch on it, but like if a goalie throws one in, you don't spend hopefully 4 minutes going, what has he done there? He's obviously just made a rick and it's been horrendous. There's no more you can say about it. It's a mistake. But when you're looking at, it was Messina that scored, wasn't it? And when that's just a case of an opponent watching his opponent just. And again, I'm not being condescending when I say this. When he runs past you towards your goal, and
trigger something,
you kind of just go, "Oh, he scored." That's not really acceptable. I'd like to think that would be addressed by his boss and his teammates as well. Yeah, yes, there's a lot that goes into it. Too easy. From Bong fullback to allow was it Sarr, I think, that drove and pulled the ball back. Yeah, and yes, there's a clash with Samba, who gets a hefty knock on his head, doesn't he? But collectively, there's a lot of things that go wrong into making that goal come about. And then you see the other side of Anthony's game when the swagger's there, as it was, like you say, in the Derby match. A lot of swagger and a lot of confidence, which comes from the knockout that we saw help Brighton into the Premier League. And then I think, and given how he's bounced around a little bit in between getting them into the Premier League and wondering where he fits in the Premier League, and then maybe being able to come to Forest and find his feet again under Chris. I think you're absolutely right. But I think when you look at the consistency of a player and the expectation level on a player, again, that's got to be spread around, because if he is that good to carry teams on his own and win games on his own, then he's not playing for Forest, who are at the wrong end of the Championship, is he? He's playing in the Premier League with teams that he's helped establish themselves in the Premier League. So it's a tough one, because in theory he's probably played his best football under Chris, hasn't he? And I think that's what Chris will be hoping for from a creative point of view, because that's another thing we discussed after the game, where that creation is going to come from. And I've already mentioned Joe and how good Joe was last season. But sometimes you take players out of a football team that get transferred. It's not just that player that you miss, i.e. Matty Cash. It's what Matty Cash helped to make Joe Lolly over the course of that season. And whether you get someone in that can facilitate that type of play, or just think, you know what, let's try both of them. Get them both on the pitch, either side of the pitch. Give them the freedom to chop and change in the game. If you know what I mean, like you see it sometimes when a winger's not getting the beating of a fullback, he has a little wander off, doesn't he? I'll go and give the other side a blast, see what happens over there. And I don't think Forest are out of the woods yet completely when it comes to being able to do what they want in games, to try out different formations and different approaches between now and the end of the season. But I'd like to think they get to a stage of the season where they think we can give that a bash, just to see, maybe give us a sight of what we might see for them next time around.
Mm-hmm. So just quickly on Knockaert then, would you want him back next year? He's going to take a chunk of your wage bill, even if you get him back on loan. But he is quality at championship level. So do you take a big slice of your budget and hope that he delivers?
I think that's the thing. I think he has been quality at championship level. I just think that consistency needs to come back. The numbers have to improve, I think, with assists and goals, obviously. So yeah, I think I'm trying to think if anyone is jumping out off the top of my head that you think would be as good or an upgrade. None at this moment in time. And like I said, given his history with Chris, all you need, and again, apologies for making it sound simplistic, to get out of the championship is that one golden season. If he comes back and starts ripping things up and being the player that, as we saw at Brighton, then it is worth a punt. But again, apologies for sounding a bit vague with this, but it's a gamble, isn't it, with regards to getting players in your side and going, we're committing to this player for 12 months. This is how much money he's going to get, part of our pot. But what we need from you, Anthony, is consistent output.
There's a very big consensus amongst Forest fans to get Garner back next season on loan if they can. So the other player I was going to ask you about would be Krovinovic. What are your thoughts on him? Because I think he's done really well, but then you look at his actual numbers and it's played 10, scored none, assists none. It's hard to pin, you can't judge a player just by his numbers. But what do you think when you see Krovinovic? Does he look a top-class championship player to you?
I think he's got it in him. I think the Ghana one's really intriguing because, like I said, the big build-up that he's got. But the fact that we're talking about the player and the numbers that he brings, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because we all like a bit of this kind of stat-based approach to football. And I think if you're absolutely right, if you are playing in a football club, in a football team, in a specific position, then the expectation has got to be there. And with Ghana being the younger of the two, and obviously Krovinovic is not getting on at all. 25 is a fantastic age for a footballer, and really hopefully coming into the meat of his career with Forest. Then I think the player that we've seen obviously at West Brom, the player that we've seen so far at Forest, I think is appealing, is positive, is there's certainly there should be an optimism about him being part of the setup going forward. And with Ghana being the young player that he is, needing to get the minutes under his belt, obviously in the longer run you are benefiting Manchester United if he becomes a very, very good midfielder. But enjoying him while he's here, getting the best out of him while he's here is absolutely imperative from Chris. And I think I can see them both in a midfield that could be competitive in the Championship. I just think if you look at the first part of the season, the fact that you had James obviously experience being at Watford, then coming out of there, then coming to Forest, to get them up to speed whilst games are running out is a big ask. But also it gives us, as we said, a taste of perhaps what we could see from them next season. And if you go across what we've seen from particularly successful sides at the top end of the Championship, midfield sticking out with striking options sticking out. Again, I go back to the team that we spoke about that started the Watford game. That is a competitive 11 in my eyes. It's a competitive squad in my eyes to at least be looking at the top half of the division. I think Krovinovic and Ghana do fit into that.
I must admit, I quite like a midfield next season of Ghana, Krovinovic as an 8, not a 10, and then Johnson as a 10 with Yates and Cafu backing them up. But then you're still left with
sitting and holding,
Yeah, but then you're still left with Colback and Arter, not even on the, potentially on the bench earning a lot of money. So you wouldn't want to be building. You wouldn't be necessarily building a squad or be in Chris Hughton's shoes in the sense that it's not easy, is it?
Well, it's not. But managing Forest isn't easy, and following Forest is infinitely less easy than all of the above. So I can see that. So I'm sure Forest fans are sat there, arms folded, saying, "Come on, then." Put that team together, shows how it's meant to function. I think that formation that you just said there, Matt, is really intriguing, isn't it? Because and again, without wanting to heap pressure on the shoulders of a player that's not physically wearing the Forest shirt at this moment in time. The dynamism at which Brennan plays with and the athleticism that he's got. Again, going back to the Matty Cash, Joe Lolly conundrum of how a player can make a teammate better. Maybe we'll see that with a player such as Brennan coming into the fold, and you don't have to shake things up purely from a personality point of view. You can shake things up from the way that you play football, the energy and the exuberance that you bring. And this is me, before we get into anything tactical or technical about Brennan, because he's a very good footballer. The just the kind of footballing personality that you see as a player coming in. And when you say, like you say, with the likes of Cafu there and Colback, when we see, I mean, another player in Sambaso who we've discussed in the past, who's brought a steel to a Forest midfield. There's players there that we're listing that fit into a very similar mould, and I think it is a conundrum for Chris when it comes to whether you go with the experience of Anata or, like you say, Colback or players such as that, or you do kind of have them in reserve, have them as part of a squad, and go with a bit of a younger, less world-weary element.
True. Well, Sarri's out of contract, so I think he might be a victim of what we talked about, that many midfielders and his injury record.
Yeah,
so
but that's what I mean. But when we've spoken about Forest in the past, when we've looked at games where he's not played, there was a certain stretch of games under Sabri where Forest were a better side with him in it, were a stronger side with him in it. But as you say, when injuries creep up, and especially given it's not only the financial impact of what the pandemic's brought, but I think it's made judgment on players possibly even more immediate, hasn't it? Sammy Amiobi, again, another player. Maybe Chris has seen enough of these players and thought, well, if we're going to give you contracts and you can't guarantee me games, every player is, of course, at the mercy of form and fitness, then you've got to move on. He's got to go on to another player that he feels he can get more minutes out of, and for it to have more punch for the pound when it comes to being able to say, we're paying this player X amount of money. In theory, I'm going to get X amount of games out of it. It might come down, when we talk about numbers of players, it might come down to the numbers when it comes to him discussing that with the people upstairs who are in charge, that type of thing.
True. One other name I'll throw out there quickly. Have you seen much of this other kid at Lincoln, Rogers, the one they've got on loan from Man City? I wouldn't mind seeing him coming on loan.
Yes, scored last night, didn't he? I think.
Yeah, very good. Yeah,
and he's been. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And it's testament to what Michael Appleton's doing with that side, that he's getting good players from good teams that he's got a real affinity with coaching them. I've seen his kind of coaching journey, if you like, which is such a negative way of saying someone's career, but he's certainly got an ability, a very good coaching ability, and I think that's a terrific shout. That's a terrific shout. Can you imagine if you get Brennan coming back to his hometown club, you also get Rogers coming off the back of wanting to learn, wanting to develop, going up that extra level, but also with a player that he knows well and the game that he knows of him after having that experience at Lincoln. There's another intriguing proposition, and given how much money Man City have got, you'd like to think they might pick up most of the bill.
You'd hope. Right, let's finish. we touched on it ages way back at the start of this about the Championship in general next season. How do you think the landscape's going to be? Because there'll always be Premier League parachute money. So there's going to be a clutch of teams with a lot in the bank. There's also, it sounds like, from what we're hearing this week, going to be a clutch of clubs who are absolutely skint because of the pandemic. Is it going to be a very uneven playing field next year, do you think?
It's going to be... I mean, the attritional side of it as well might come to the fore. I don't think the clubs have had a free hit at it, considering fans haven't been there, because yes, you get that instant reaction and the visceral reaction of fans that are in stadiums, whether it's joyous cheer or quite heavy set booing, which instantly tells you whether people think you've been good, bad, or indifferent. But there's an ability to watch football and pull it apart and discuss it as it's all been done digitally and remotely now, means that it feels like there's more focus on it than ever before, doesn't it? And we've seen teams struggle without fans, we've seen teams blossom without fans. But I think if you look at the potential of who might come down, West Brom, you feel, Sheffield United, you feel, and whether it's either Newcastle, Brighton, or Fulham, you've got 3 sizable clubs coming down, like you say, with that clout that comes with the parachute payments, and then clubs that have been kind of waiting in the wilderness of the second tier for quite a long period of time. Forest have got to come into that. Derby have got to come into that. Reading, I think, if they're still in the division, Stoke is another one. Well, so many. I'm quite obviously just listing the table that I'm looking at here, but for the rest who haven't got those specific finances, it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be really, really tough. And I think, as we saw with tightening the belts at Premier League level, I think we're going to see a lot of that from Championship clubs. I just hope that doesn't mean that bites and eats into the quality that we see on the pitch. Again, I think the quality has varied and it has ebbed and flowed over the course of the season because of I mean, let's not take away the human element of being looking at players to perform in what are very tumultuous times, but also the speed that the games are coming around, the fact that we've had less of a break, the fact that it's quite obvious there's been less money spent on pitches and maintenance to that, and understandably so. If you're in charge of a big business and you get away without throwing money at things, yes, it's important to have a good pitch, but it's not absolutely imperative, is it? I mean, if it doesn't look like a bowling green in the middle of a pandemic, I think a lot of people are going, well, we can understand that. We can let you off with that one. But I think it's such a valid point that you raised, Matt, that there could be a huge discrepancy and a disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and whether that gets redressed. It won't get redressed over the course of the season, because if you're looking at teams that are looking at balance sheets and clubs that are looking at balance sheets, that once again, I'm not just saying this to blow smoke up the backsides of supporters, but yes, we love the fact that they're there. They make a lot of noise. They're part of the very fabric of what we know to be the football that we love. But the money side of it is as well. They've got to get them through the gates. They've got to get the numbers back through the gates to be able to facilitate football clubs motoring on and getting hopefully back to some form of balance. But it's an intriguing. I say intriguing. It is an intriguing proposition to think perhaps of what the Championship could look like, and sorry to waffle on, but it does bring into real sharp focus just how monumental that achievement is to climb out and kind of get there. Leeds have done it. I'm sorry, Forest fans to mention Leeds again, but Leeds have done it after such a long period of time. They're then spending 15, 20 million pounds on players. They're talking about redeveloping Ellen Road. They're talking about what it brings to the city, what it brings to the region. And Forest fans, I'm sure, sat there going, why not? They're thinking, what if? Why can't that be how we go about it? Yes, the intangibles are minutiae of getting Leeds into the Premier League, getting Forest into the Premier League are very, very different. But to have that one stellar season that gets you back up and gives you that foothold, that kind of fingers gripping onto the ledge of what the Premier League is, then suddenly the future looks a lot brighter. But I'm making it sound straightforward. It's a hell of a task, and it'll be just as tough, if not harder, next season.
Why not, indeed? Why not for Forest? Let's hope we can keep dreaming. That's why we're all still here.
Hope that brings you back, mate. It brings you back. It keeps us all believing, doesn't it?
Exactly. Right, we shall leave it there. Thanks to everyone who watched along and asked questions as ever. If you want to shout at the TV and tell David that he's biased against Forest, you can catch him on Sky Sports. And also,
let me just butt in there. We had one the other week, and you know I like to reference when people hammer me because it's A, it keeps your feet on the ground. B, I find it quite funny. We were discussing off the back of the East Midlands derby, of course, and I was in the strange position where we were chatting about it on like a roundup results thing, and my mate who was running it had the wonderful pleasure of being able to batter me from both sides of that equation, that I wasn't being nice about Forest and I wasn't being nice about Derby. So it was a conundrum that I found myself in, thinking, well, I don't know what I've managed to hit on there, but to annoy both sets of fans involved in that is it's bizarre, but that's the way it is, and it gives you a laugh as well, doesn't it? Which is the main thing.
It does. You know, I did hashtag NFFC and Prutton before this just to see what people were saying, and it gives me a laugh. Let's see whether it's worth putting a tweet out just to say David Prutton's going to be on this.
Well, and it's funny because we've mentioned Alan Rogers on this before, aka Tank, haven't we? And I was listening to again another podcast. I mean, which we've all managed to fall into off the back of what's gone on, and it was Andy Johnson talking on one about his time at Forest, and he was talking about Tank and their relationship. I say relationship. It was a 2-man wrecking crew, wasn't it? And it was just fascinating to hear that, because we mentioned it earlier on about Forest at the turn of the century in a certain kind of incarnation, and what Andy was, or Jono, and what Tank was like. And it's football from a different era, not only on the pitch but even more so off the pitch, which if you want an inside track on what it was like, I'd search that up, because it's staggeringly frightening. Some of the things that they got up to, and I saw a lot of it firsthand, and it's all true. But it's just funny, isn't it? How we all ebb and flow, but fundamentally we've got the best interests of Forest hopefully at heart.
True. We all grow up, although I'm not sure those two do.
No,
I can imagine them still
those two don't. Come on.
Right, we'll leave it there. If you're an Inter Milan fan or a Juventus fan, you can also moan at David on Premier Sports when he's commenting on Serie A. I'm sure there's a few Juventus fans there. It's finished on
that Ronaldo lad don't know he's born, does he?
Well, let's finish on Juventus. They got knocked out of the Champions League last night. They've won 2 Champions Leagues, and so have Nottingham Forest from 2 attempts being in the competition. No, 3 being in the competition. So not too bad at all. Right. Thanks very much, everyone. We shall be back next week. And thanks as ever to Prutz, who always helps us out. Have a good week, everyone. We'll see you soon.